Welcome to Fatima Today. I'm Paul Morell and I'll be your host. The Blessed Virgin Mary appeared to 3 small children in the village of Fatima, Portugal in 1917. Although almost 100 years ago, her message was timeless. Pray the rosary daily. Do penance for your sins and the sins of others. Make reparations. Turn back to her Son. Receive the Eucharist. Adore Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. As I said, it was a timeless call, but it was a call to holiness. Our next guest answered that call to holiness. He responded. He's a seemingly ordinary parish priest, but he has a very extraordinary background. I'm very pleased to have Father Darin Collarusso. And Darin and I have a common alma mater. No, it's not Notre Dame. It's the United States Air Force Academy. In 1978, I graduated from the United States Air Force Academy, became an officer in the Air Force, and then a pilot. 10 years later, in 1988, Father Darin graduated, became an officer, and a backseater in an F-15 fighter. Our parallel stories split, though, because Father Darin watched a movie on Fatima, and that changed his life. He began a transition from aerial warfare to spiritual warfare. He began a transition from the back seat of an F-15 to becoming a parish priest in a local parish here in Boston. It's my pleasure to have with us today Father Darin. Father Darin Collarusso, welcome.
Nice to be here, Paul.
You have an extraordinary background, and we'll get into that a little later, but I'd like to talk about something that everyone can relate to, just growing up and our spiritual story growing up. Can you share with us a little bit about your spiritual background as a child?
Well, in my family, we were practicing Catholics, but in the 70s and 80s, there wasn't a lot of cultural devotion, if you will. It was more, I went to CCD, I attained the sacraments on time. We went to Mass every Sunday, but that was the sum total of it. With the exception of being of Italian descent, I was very familiar with my grandmother saying the rosary from a very early age, although myself, I wasn't very familiar with it.
So you just have an image of her, a memory of her saying the rosary. Was that on a daily basis, or
my very first memory of prayer is walking into my grandmother's room, probably when I was about 4 or 5, and she would be quietly praying the rosary at night because my grandfather had passed away, and she was praying the rosary for him. Oh. She didn't really, she was in prayer, so right. I didn't pray it with her. I just right. walked in, observed, and then would walk out.
That was a powerful image that you kept in your unconscious.
Absolutely.
That's great. And oftentimes, mom and dads maybe don't even realize the power they have to model to their children, not necessarily by speaking to them, by maybe just praying the rosary, maybe in their bedroom on their knees. Whenever young children see a mother or father or grandparent on their knees submitting to God and offering petitions to God, we don't realize that has a powerful impact, and that'll stay with us all our lives. So that's great that you brought that up. So briefly, as you were growing up, did you have a Catholic education, or were you in a public school? Or
public school my whole life,
yeah.
And didn't ever think about being a priest.
Okay.
I wasn't an altar server. I wanted to fly airplanes. That's what I wanted to do.
Okay. And then you, as we talked about, you went to the United States Air Force Academy. That's a big deal. You were born here in Massachusetts, is that right?
Yes.
And so a congressman or senator nominated you, and then you made the decision to go to the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado.
Yes.
And obviously it's a military academy similar to West Point and Annapolis. How was that experience for you, not from a military perspective, but from a spiritual perspective?
Well, when you go there, you're separated from your family. I only went primarily because I wanted to fly. I would not have gone to Colorado just to go to school there. So you're usually, a lot of the people that go there when they're in basic training, they're missing their families. So probably the first experience with daily Mass was after dinner, you were allowed to go to worship service, but what they would call it. And we would go to daily Mass during basic training, and then on Sundays. At the Air Force Academy or at the military academies, spirituality of the person is promoted, even though they don't dictate what it is. So
right.
It wasn't the typical college experience where
right.
It dissipated. It actually picked up.
Right. I remember as a cadet the freshman year especially, when we're under so much pressure, the priest back then, Father Shannon, was back in the 70s, and he was, for me, just the only touch of humanity while I was there. I mean, he showed emotion, he was a loving man, and people flocked to him and flocked to Mass to just get away from the military regimen. So it wasn't like we were, I mean, we were turning to God in a stressful situation, and you know, as a young 18-year-old, sometimes that's the first time that that's the situation.
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely a deep spiritual experience.
Yeah. Did you go to daily Mass, or was it just more?
Only during basic training. Once
Yeah.
the school year started,
Right.
it was Sundays. They
Okay.
even had a Sunday evening Mass, and I'd go with my friends.
Okay. So you graduate from the academy, you're a new officer in the Air Force, and you become eventually a backseater. And how about your spirituality as you're progressing in your young 20s now? You're in the Air Force and you're out there.
Well, as I said, I had no conception of my vocation as a priest,
Okay.
but I did have a sense of, I definitely wanted to be married, and I had a sense that I was Catholic. Being in the Air Force, you could end up marrying somebody from a different faith and move somewhere far away from home.
Right.
I always had a sense that I wanted to be married in a Catholic church and come back to Massachusetts.
Yeah.
But that was the primary focus. So I would go to Mass on Sundays as often as possible,
Yeah.
and receive the sacraments
Right.
as necessary.
Right.
And that was the sum total of it.
Yeah. One of the things that I experienced in the Air Force, because in Massachusetts it's a Catholic community, a very large archdiocese here in Boston. But as an Air Force officer in Charleston, South
Yeah.
Carolina, in pilot training in Oklahoma, there were a lot of fundamentalist Christians there that were
right.
challenging me in my faith and asking me questions that for the first time I was being challenged, like, why do people say prayers to Mary, and what's the
Right.
deal with the Pope? Have you had that experience?
Yeah, that was completely my experience, and I had a somewhat inadequate responses. They weren't. I answered the best I could. I answered from an experience of a believer, but having not had the best catechesis growing up, the answers were sort of inadequate. But we had conversations, and my friends, they didn't necessarily know their faith super perfectly either. So, but I never was very happy with my answers that I gave.
So did you actually investigate apologetics a little bit? Did you research?
Not until one time when I had an assignment.
What happened?
I had there was some transitioning going on in my career and in the Air Force in 1995 and 1996, and I went from, I got a one-year remote, what we call a remote assignment, to Korea, and that was a non-flying assignment. So I was able to, it actually, in retrospect, it became sort of a retreat type experience in the Air Force because my daily routine was so different, and I was able to start investigating my faith. When I went to Korea, I was not flying, so at night I would read books about the Catholic Church, and I would investigate these questions that people had. Plus, I would, make sure I went
Yeah.
to Mass as
Right.
often as possible.
Now, during this phase of your life, you it wasn't really like you knew you were going to be a priest.
No,
you
not
were,
at all.
but you were just being a conscientious Catholic
Right.
and exploring your faith deeper. Tell us about what happened. What made the transition for you to start discerning about the priesthood?
Yeah, the big primary event was on base. We have a base chapel. It's a multi-faith worship space, and so I went there, and we have a Catholic religious education office, and it was not a very big office, but in the back behind the religious ed desk was videos and books, and because the biggest distinction between Catholics and non-Catholics is the Blessed Mother, I went right for a video on the Blessed Mother because I knew that was always the toughest question to answer. So I pull out this video. It's a little section on Marian videos, and I saw one with Ricardo Montalban in it. And and I said,
Khan.
wow, Wrath of Khan. Khan
Yeah.
is in the video about the
Exactly.
Blessed Mother. Well, I got to see this. So I watched it, and I was blown away because I had never heard of Fatima, or if I had heard it, it didn't mean anything to me. And for me, it wasn't so much, I did believe immediately once I saw the video, but for me, I was more struck by the fact that I was never introduced to the story of Fatima, and that other people believed in this apparition, and that people gathered, 70,000 people gathered on a particular date, and the Blessed Mother came and there was the miracle of the sun. So I didn't know all these things. And so at that point, I started praying the rosary very intently because of that video.
Wow. That is really quite an impact that movie had on you. So you start, your life changes drastically in the fact that your prayer life became much more intense.
I started praying the rosary on a nightly basis, and again, for the most part, I had no concept of the vocation God was calling me to. So I was basically praying for holiness and praying for the vocation of marriage to bear fruit and for me to be married.
And you were quite a catch. I'm surprised that someone like you, a nice-looking guy that's got a prayer life, and no one latched onto you. But
well, it worked out pretty good on remote because there wasn't
not that many people. Okay,
there were some very good people there, but it was.
I hear you. Now, the Fatima message, which, as we know, talks about a call to prayer, but then fasting, penance. I mean, did you partake in any of these calls at all at that time, or maybe even now?
Well, of course, I was praying the rosary intently, and it was meditating on the mysteries, and I would be doing it on my knees in my room, in solitude, almost very similar to my grandmother. And then I would also start fasting. I started fasting more.
Okay.
And one time was this one experience for Easter. A friend of mine who actually came to my ordination, an Air Force friend of mine from the academy, was there, and he said, if you really want to fast, eat nothing between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. And so I just drank water between Good Friday and Easter Sunday.
So we're not promoting that here
on
Fatima today.
We're not promoting that.
But
I haven't done that since. I haven't done that since. But that was the intensity of the day.
And fasting is good because it helps us to let go of attachments that we have.
Absolutely, it's a mortification of the flesh.
And it opens our spirit up more to God.
Absolutely.
Now, God's call to you as a vocation of a priest, somewhere along the way, you're praying the rosary. What happened? How did you finally realize that, you know what, I'm not going to do the vocation of marriage. I think God's calling me to something else?
Well, I was praying the sorrowful mysteries, meditating on the sufferings of our Lord. And I remember very distinctly the day I was in my bedroom, I was on my knees, and I was praying, and I was praying, again, as I said, for the vocation of marriage, and just it sort of came to me that I want you to be a priest. It wasn't, I couldn't hear a voice, it just popped into my head. And my response was, you've got to be kidding me. Because for me, that was so opposite of what I had expected myself to do, and it was opposite of the life that I expected for myself. And of course, basically the big thing would have been the call to celibacy, which I felt was really not for me. But eventually, as within a few weeks, I was saying, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, because I've had such a blessed life, I'll suffer for the rest of my life if that's what you want.
That was your version of the
That was
priesthood.
my version of it. Okay. But over time, I also tried. But at that point, all I really needed to do was investigate priesthood.
Yeah.
I said, okay, I will give you the chance to show me what you want me to do.
Right.
That was even the call to celibacy was moderated, if you will, by the fact that I didn't have to sign up for it the next day. I just had to investigate it. Yeah. And if the answer back is no, well, happy.
Right. But as a good Catholic single person, we're celibate until marriage anyway.
Of course.
So, so when you were undergoing this this discerning process, did you actually, as a layperson, seek out a spiritual director, or was that something that you didn't really get into until the seminary?
Not really, no. My next assignment that I went to, there was a priest on base that I became friendly with. Yeah. And we had, at that point, once you're investigating the priesthood, you start having in-depth conversations about it, and it becomes a form of spiritual direction in a sense.
Right. So what I'd like to bring up here is the fact that you're an average guy, layperson, more than average, but you're a normal guy, and you're praying and you're listening, and that's how God talks to us, is in the quiet of the moment. When we keep open, God will talk to us and God will speak to us as He did to you in prayer. And for those of us who may not necessarily be priests, but are just looking for any vocation, for God's call for us in our life, prayer is really how we find out, and we have to make space to listen. And then when we listen, God will speak to us just as he did to...
Absolutely.
And then the concept of spiritual direction is something that not many lay people know about, but really it is open to lay people.
Absolutely.
It's not just for priests and religious. Is you can go to a priest or a nun and ask them for spiritual direction to help you with your vocation. So it's kind of nice that we have those two concepts that I think any person in the audience can really relate to. Now tell me a little bit about your letting go aspect of resigning your commission as an Air Force officer and taking the plunge, making that big decision. What was that like for you?
Well, as I said, my assumption was because I was Catholic, a practicing Catholic, the call to priesthood, I already understood the basics of it, and I figured I would just explore it. But at the time, the way I thought was, while I'm in the military, I'll just study to be a chaplain, and I'll stay in the military. If you're flying aircraft in the Air Force and you want to be a lawyer, they'll send you to law school, and you come back and you be a lawyer. I figured, well, I would just go to the seminary as an Air Force Reserve officer, come back in active duty as a chaplain. It doesn't work that way. You have to completely resign your commission and get completely out of the Air Force. And for me, that was a big shock, or something very unexpected, that I would have to give up everything that I had studied for and worked for since I was 18. I mean, that was my life. That was my career. Right. I knew at 42 I'd probably resign from the Air Force, but that was the track I expected. Right. Not to leave it all and to walk away from it to investigate another vocation.
So you're faced with the cliff. You're at the end of the cliff, and really the choice is, do you step off or turn back? And
part of the cliff is, what if I go to the seminary and the answer back to God, Christ answers my question. He says, well, I wanted you to discern this, but it's not for you. Right. I would have left the Air Force, not been a priest.
Right. For the average person out there, they may not understand the implications of what you're saying, but it would be like renouncing your citizenship as a United States citizen. I mean, it's a big deal when you have a regular commission that you receive from the Air Force Academy, and then you just say, I'm not going to do that.
Oh, and you're flying jets, and the chance of getting back into flying aircraft might be...
very, very, very low. So you made that step, you resign your commission, you enter the seminary. When you were at the seminary, just very, very quickly, you've got the Air Force Academy as a cadet, and now all of a sudden you're in the seminary. Just quickly, did the academy prepare you for the seminary?
A little bit. It was, because you're living with a group of men that have a similar mission.
Right.
You all have a similar spirit.
Right.
But it was like Air Force Academy light.
Yeah.
Other guys would have problems that for me were just, what's not to like is how I looked at it.
Did you do morning runs where you had the flag and you were running around?
No, we didn't have to do Jody calls and all that.
Okay.
We just prayed in the morning together.
Oh, well, that's better.
Very similar.
When you graduated, the academy graduation is a big deal. What was your seminary graduation like in your ordination?
Well, there's no formal graduation from the seminary. It's the ordination.
Okay.
And that's very profound. It's now where the seminary experience is a little bit like Air Force Academy light. The ordination is like Air Force Academy graduation times 10. It's amazing.
Good.
It's absolutely amazing.
Cool. I have to ask you, just to get into some of your roles as a priest now. You're a parish priest at Braintree here in Massachusetts. And
St. Francis of Assisi.
St. Francis of Assisi. They're very lucky to have you. One of the things from Fatima that we know is that the angel came to the children, prepared them for eventually seeing the Blessed Mother. And one of the things the angel did was he took the blessed body of Jesus in the host and gave them communion and then helped them understand about adoration. What are your feelings about adoration in this day and age?
Adoration is absolutely critical. John Paul II and now Benedict have both spoke about how adoration is an extension of communion. It allows us to enter into communion with the Lord and extend that time of communion. It's our way of loving Him and His way of showing His love back, and it is being promoted. At the seminary, we have adoration every day. We now have adoration in the diocese for vocations. We're having an adoration October 20th at St. Francis for vocations, and as some people may have heard, the Heart of John Vianney, the patron saint of diocesan priests, will be at the seminary, and we'll have adoration with the Blessed Sacrament and the Heart of John Vianney there present.
One of the things I've found as a layperson is that, adoration, sometimes it has certain hours at certain churches, but what I find is that if the priest, if the parish priest, the head priest would be what?
The pastor.
The pastor would take the risk and keep those churches open so that the people can go and worship the Blessed Sacrament just because it's not exposed in the monstrance. There are many Catholics that want to, that will take advantage. If the doors are open, we'll go in and pay a visit to the Blessed Sacrament, you know, and maybe that's not technically adoration with the monstrance, but you know, when you sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, God speaks to you in a special way.
Well, that's why we want the tabernacle to be in a prominent place.
Exactly.
So that you can pray before
Yeah.
the presence of the Lord there. And we have a chapel in the rectory where when we do prayers, we have the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, the presence of Christ.
We know that it's a challenge for pastors because there's a lot of things that go on culturally, but if we can somehow keep those church doors open so we could just pay a visit to the Blessed Sacrament, you know, that would be awesome. But that's my 2 cents. So I wanted to ask you, you know, it's not that often you get to ask a priest fresh out of the seminary. Do you have any different awareness of what about spirituality now that you didn't have when you were a very conscientious Catholic lay single man? You know, here you are now, you're a priest, you've gone through the seminary, you're ordained. What's different? What do you understand that's different?
Well, there's a much greater sense that our spiritual life connects us to God, and by that we receive divine life. That this whole enterprise that Christ set up is to give humans a participation in the love of God in a very distinct way, in a very way that transforms you. So it's a way of transforming the person to be more like Christ. And the Blessed Mother is very instrumental in that, obviously.
So at the parish level, this happens?
At every level it happens. The parish level, that's why we have, the parish exists to give a font of divine life to the people in all areas, primarily through the Eucharist. And that participation continues in prayer, particularly, as we say, meditating on the Rosary or praying to God or adoration. All these things are a way of us being the branches on the vine, whereas Christ said, I am the vine, you are the branches. Our spiritual life is to keep us on the vine and keep us in union with Him.
Wow. Just one more question. You know, as an archdiocesan priest, a diocesan priest now, in the Archdiocese of Boston, what do you see as a challenge as a parish priest, or even in the Archdiocese? But you could take that where you want it.
Well, where we are now is obviously there's a lot of changes going on, but the end point of all these things is going to be a sense of Catholic identity, a sense of who we are, why we're in the world, and being united to Christ and the Blessed Mother unapologetically, not fundamentalistly or gruffly, but as witnesses to the world of God's grace. But we have to do that by knowing who we are, by being who we are, and that is our big challenge, knowing what the church is and what we need to be.
So is that challenge, do you see that mostly in the age group of the young adults, or is it, you know, in older parishioners, or is that?
The challenge is across the board.
Across the board?
Because the younger generations have been poorly catechized, and there's not that many older generations. Only the older generation has been really, truly catechized knowledgeably, but we're also going into a different time, so we all are required to transform ourselves into where we are today.
So you made an interesting statement that the generations are poorly catechized. Taught. What are you doing to, you know, so is there a focus on changing that? Are we increasing the catechesis, you know,
well, the best
making
thing,
it stronger?
for me, the most direct is my preaching, is I try to keep it oriented on the gospel and infused with the doctrine of the church.
Right.
In our, as you know, we have a catechism of the Catholic Church. We have now an adult catechism, a compendium that came out. Yeah. And our religious ed classes are all infused with the truth. Right.
You know, I was an altar boy, and I know you weren't, but when I was up there as an altar boy, I was looking at the priest in awe, you know, consecrating the bread and wine into the body and blood. Just real quick, I mean, what's it like for you? It must be just an incredible experience, or is it kind of like you still can't believe you're doing it? Or
It's
I
a
mean,
very
is it-
profound realization. It was, even though in the seminary I learned primarily about what that's about, it's only when you're doing it that you realize what you're doing, which is you're entering into a Trinitarian action where the priest, as the icon of Christ, as acting in the person of Christ, is offering the sacrifice of Calvary up to the Father for the sins of the world. And you realize that you're involved in that. And the parishioners are all involved in that too, because their prayers,
Wow.
their activity occurs in the parish,
Wow.
because their prayers are being offered up for the world
Wow.
and for themselves at that time too.
Powerful. I don't mean to cut you off. Maybe the next show we'll talk about more deeply about that. But
Maybe.
listen, thank you for coming, my friend.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much.
God bless you, and God
bless
bless
you.
your ministry and
Thank you.
St. Francis' very lucky parish. So we just want to remind all of our listeners out there to heed what the Blessed Mother asks us to do, to pray our rosary daily and wear our scapular. And thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week on Fatima Today. God bless you all.
Jacinta, one of the 3 children to whom Our Lady appeared, received this statement from Our Lady: "Priests must be pure, very pure." They should not busy themselves with anything except what concerns the Church and souls. The disobedience of priests to their superiors and to the Holy Father is very displeasing to our Lord.